Hello, and thank you for tuning back in to the Paisano Presents, the online video production arm of UTSA's independent student newspaper. I'm Matthew Duarte, and this is Campus Conversation, where we have a nice chat with community leaders from UTSA and from the San Antonio area. With me today is District 8 City Councilman Ron Nirenberg. Ron, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Now, I know, Ron, you have a lot of UTSA staffers working for you at the moment, and I know that you've always been a big fan of UTSA. I'd like to start off by asking you about something you proposed back over the summer, economic overlay zones around UTSA. Could you briefly explain what those are?
Yeah, well, and thanks for having me, and absolutely, we're very vested in UTSA as a community. In fact, District 8, which encompasses the northwest side, one of the centers of gravity is UTSA, and so I've always viewed this city and how this city goes will be to the extent that we can make UTSA a continually successful university. So the university overlay zones were intended to be a zoning area around the university main campus in which we would encourage the kind of development that's conducive to student living, student life.
So coffee shops, bars?
Yeah, that sort of thing. And we want to have them grow up and be developed around the university in closer proximity to the university, which does two things. One, it allows the campus life to be more vibrant. It allows for students to, experience what it's like to be a university student and do, and go to the places and find recreation in areas that are closer to campus, so so you don't have to travel as much. But it also helps create that density of student life closer in, so we keep the sprawl of the campus away from these more built-out legacy neighborhoods, which is good for everybody. It's good for the neighborhoods because they want to maintain their quiet atmosphere, but it's also good for the students and for the university faculty and staff to have these places that are needed closer by. And it's one of those things, again, in order to become a Tier 1 university, it's not just on the university, it's on the city and the surrounding area to make sure that we have a vibrant community that attracts the best and brightest, and that we can continue to brand our university as a premier place to be.
And I know that with these university overlay zones, it's been on the drawing board for a while, and y'all are still figuring out exactly how you want to implement this. Can you give a brief update? Yeah.
Well, so it takes a little time to go through committee and all that, but what I've asked for is a proposal from staff. So basically I proposed the university overlay zone with my colleague Shirley Gonzalez, who represents the downtown campus. We proposed this idea, so now we need to report back from staff on how they actually can execute that plan. We've had an initial discussion in our infrastructure and growth committee. It's one of it's one of the subcommittees of City Council. And they presented, some challenges. We asked them to go back and take a look at how we can accelerate the development of these zones. And I chair the Comprehensive Planning Committee for Council, which is looking at the growth of the whole city. So what we want to do is make sure that the university zones are considered and part of the conversation of building the whole city.
How many of these overlay zones have we implemented in San Antonio so far? Is this a new thing?
It's a new thing. We've never done it before. It's been talked about in the past, but it's clearly needed here on the north side and the main campus, because again, we've seen the explosion of growth in and around the university campus, and we want to make sure that growth is conducive to student life, but it's also protective of the neighborhood life that's been there forever. What we've proposed is that these overlay zones need to be considered essentially in three main places. One is the main campus, the other is the downtown campus, and then the third one is the Park West facility, athletics facility that has been built up and is continuing to grow. All around those areas are, again, San Antonio, as it's grown, it has encompassed these areas, and these campuses have grown up in the middle of them, and we want to make sure that happens in a coherent and collaborative way.
And what's the atmosphere like in City Council regarding these overlay zones? Is there a lot of support? Have people come and told you, hey, maybe this isn't such a great idea?
Yeah, no, it's been very positive. In fact, we've gotten a lot of comments that said, well, it's about time we did something like this. legally and technically we have to go through a process to make sure that the right plans are in place, the right incentives if necessary are in place, the right restrictions on certain developments need to be considered, that sort of thing. But it's been very positive. People want to see the growth of our university in a positive light, and I think this is one way to do that for everyone. And also the other universities are interested in what's going on as well because they have similar challenges on their campuses.
And so, as I understand it, last time we spoke, the proposal is expected to be out sometime in the next few weeks?
Well, no, so this committee meets monthly,
Okay.
and we last had the presentation, I think, about 2 or 3 months ago. We're going through a comprehensive planning process, and the reality is we have only so many people in the city's planning department, so they have to reconsider all the things that we asked them to put into this proposal. I can't give you a definite time period, but I'm hoping that within the next 3 to 4 months we hear about the university overlay zones again.
And I want to switch gears and ask a question that someone proposed on Twitter.
Yeah.
One of the students here at UTSA asks, does Councilman Nirenberg support the Raiders coming to
Oh.
SA?
Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, I think that San Antonio is a top-tier city, and as a top-tier city, we are NFL ready. I think I've been here now for almost 20 years, and the sense that this is a big city that is ready to see a team has been around for quite some time. In fact, it was a conversation when the Alamo Dome was built. Having said that, we need to be very careful about making overtures to the NFL. It has to be prudent. The investment has to be, if there is investment, it has to be considerate of all the other priorities that we have as a council. And it has to also put San Antonio on track to have a successful franchise. Because again, I don't think it serves anyone it doesn't serve anyone any good, whether we're San Diego or San Antonio or Boston or Los Angeles. No city will thrive with an NFL franchise if they simply turn the keys over. We have to establish the rules of the game for us to have a successful NFL franchise. I think we have great models in town. There is no better model of a pro franchise, in my opinion, than the San Antonio Spurs.
You don't think there's going to be too much silver and black in San Antonio if they do decide to come?
Well, maybe we'll save people some money when they go buy jerseys and stuff to support the teams. But no, I think some light has justifiably been made of the pursuit of the Oakland Raiders. At no time do I think we should ever just again hand over the keys. But I think it makes sense for us to pursue opportunity where it exists. And right now there is definitely opportunity in the NFL. Will we land a franchise this year or in a couple of years? I don't know. But at the end of this process, I think San Antonio will be recognized nationwide as a San Antonio that's ready to play.
Alrighty, and I want to switch gears again and talk to you about probably the story that's getting the most headlines right about now, and that is Uber.
Yeah.
And I know that you've been a very strong proponent of Uber.
Yeah.
And
I had to remind someone of that on Twitter.
I saw that.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, what makes Uber different than a taxi, fundamentally? And why should they get different treatment than the taxi companies?
Well, I mean, I will disagree with the premise because the way we are treating them differently is we're actually having more restrictions in place for the ride shares currently under this ordinance that was passed in December than we are for the taxi companies. The reality is the insurance requirement, which is an obstacle for people who are part-time drivers, is not something we're even holding traditional taxi companies to. I will say this about rideshare, and I know we can get really into the weeds about Uber and Lyft and why they're either important or they're different. For me, this is about, is San Antonio ready for the future? We know there's going to be innovation. We know there's going to be disruptions in traditional marketplaces.
And you see Uber, you see Lyft as a pathway to get to the future?
Well, no, I think it's not a test, but it's a moment that shows us, okay, there's innovation in the market. How is policymaking going to respond to that? And it's very important that we respond positively. Does that mean that we don't have any public safety regulations? Absolutely not. In fact, I am for public safety considerations. In fact, we should do everything we can to protect the public. But we shouldn't do things under the guise of public safety that simply prevent a company from operating. And I think that's why you've seen some of the taxi lobby come so hard to council simply to talk about what we shouldn't be doing for Uber and Lyft. And this, don't get me wrong, this is not about Uber and Lyft. This is about innovation in the marketplace. And I will say this about how it's different. It's fundamentally different because in the taxi industry, in the traditional transportation for hire industry, you have people who are operating commercial vehicles 24 hours a day. When that car is in your driveway or it's on the road, it is operating in a commercial way. The difference between that and a rideshare is that you have people who are operating their vehicles as a personal vehicle for the vast majority of the time. The strength of rideshare is the fact that for 2 or 4 hours a week, or maybe 16 hours a week, whatever it is, this person is ready and available to give a ride. It's simply like carpooling, basically. And it's commercialized, and the important thing is it's regulated. And we want to regulate it so we protect public safety, but no more than that.
And obviously in December, Uber, Lyft, especially Uber, were trying to get City Hall to lay off all of these restrictions. And you were one of just 2 councilmen who voted on Uber's side in that case. Yeah, well, and I don't like to say I voted on Uber's side. I voted in favor of restrictions. I voted in favor of lesser restrictions, ones that protected public safety but didn't go so far as to provide obstacles for businesses. Yeah, I was clearly in the minority. What I thought we were doing was, was unnecessary to protect public safety again. It was a little frustrating because we were amending the ordinance right there and then, and we didn't really have time to review it. But over the last month and a half, 2 months, we've heard from constituents over and over again. We've heard from the public. We want to make this work. We want these companies to be able to operate. So that's why we're looking at it again. And so you think that that 2-month period where you were able to hear from constituents is going to make a difference? I know that you in December voted essentially to put it on hold and to get more input, and now... Well, I will say this, 2 months is a lot of time, but I was hearing from the public, and I think all of us were hearing from the public for months before this, for a year. I mean, a lot of people have gotten to experience Uber and Lyft and other rideshare companies in other cities, and it's becoming popular. People are understanding it to be a great option. It actually protects public safety when we have more transportation options for people. So I'm optimistic because under the leadership of the mayor and our new council colleagues, we've actually been working to find a compromise, and that's what this is going to be. It's got to be a compromise because not everyone's going to be happy. I'm sure there are going to be things in ordinance where I wouldn't want to do it that way, but we've got to find a compromise to allow for this innovation in this market to unfold. Great, and I'm going to bring up one other question from Twitter, and another individual would like to know what your stance is on the evergreen clause as it relates to the whole union negotiations that have been going on. Well, I appreciate you asking the question. The city is engaged in a collective bargaining dispute, I guess you could call it now, with our public safety unions. And make no mistake, public safety is the most important job of city government, and that's why we spend the most amount of money in it. In fact, in City Council in June, we said that in light of the rising costs in healthcare, and healthcare costs are rising regardless if it's civilian or uniform, it's rising at 2.5 times faster than revenue of the city. So we have some cost containment we need to do. So do you think the evergreen clause? Yeah, so I was getting around to that. The reason why that's important is because the evergreen clause, as it's written now, means that we can have this contract in effect, the one that has the healthcare built in that's rising at 2.5 times faster in revenue, in effect forever. It has no, I'm sorry, for 10 years. In 10 years' time, we could have such growth in that expense that we can't pay for roads, we can't pay for libraries, we can't pay for parks, the things that we also need to do as a city. So yeah, I support challenging the clause to find out if it's constitutional, and we're not, you can view it as a lawsuit, and it is, but what we're trying to find out is if we can do our duty as public officials, and I took an oath to the Texas Constitution, that if we can do
can we do our job as public officials in the city of San Antonio to pass a balanced budget, knowing that this clause can prevent us from rebalancing those things that are out of whack in the budget. So that's simply what it is, but yes, I do support the challenge of the Evergreen Clause.
Okay. Now, I was at the District 8 State of the
Yeah, thanks for coming, by the way.
It was a lot of fun. We got a chance to really engage with the community, and something that I noticed kept coming up. Obviously, District 8, one of the biggest challenges is transportation and congestion. Yeah. And something I heard rather frequently was people seem very interested in a light rail project.
It's surprising, isn't it, out here, in light of the streetcar conversation, and
which I'd like to get back to in a minute.
Yeah, no, I think it's remarkable. So we have another 1.1 million people who are going to be living in San Antonio in the next 25 years. Our population is expected to double in 35. We simply do not have the funding mechanisms in place for transportation at the state, the federal, and the local levels. And our buying power is greatly diminished because the funding mechanism has been primarily the gas tax. We don't have the money, and we don't have the infrastructure in place today to keep up with growth and demand. So we're going to have to change our thinking on transportation. Now, what you heard there when people are suggesting rail or whatever is simply what I take that as is people are beginning to come around to the notion that we can't do business as usual on transportation. We can't simply build our way out of the problem. So what I'm focused on are what are the comprehensive solutions. Forget about what mode of travel it is, but how can we get people from point A to point B, to their business, to their school, to their house, and what will that look like in the future? And I'm encouraged that people are thinking differently when it comes to transportation.
And you say people are coming around to the notion. I know back in 2000, right, light rail was on the ballot and it got shot down in spectacular fashion.
I would phrase it that exact same way. It was a spectacular defeat, yeah.
So do you think light rail is something that we need to invest in, hopefully now? I know you support voters to approve this, but you've also said that people are slowly coming around and that growth is growing faster.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly reasonable because we know in Texas this is primarily a car, rubber tires and cement kind of town. It is, and that's the way it has been for years. And I think for us to get to a different mode of travel, we're going to have to, as a public, together, decide that that's what we want to do. I mean, it's an ideological shift. It's a paradigm change in the city of San Antonio. It may mean that that's what we have to do, but we have to work on that together. And in order to do that, we have to come up with a comprehensive transportation plan that we show to the public, gets people moving, keeps our economy moving, and the only way we do that is through a comprehensive transportation package that is voter approved.
And you say voter approved. Are you at all worried that perhaps the mind of the voters is going to be a little bit behind the growth that San Antonio is experiencing? Do you think that we're not going to sit around and say we need light rail until it's too late and we're all trapped in our cars on I-10?
Well, some people in the transportation space would argue that it is too late. I take a different tact. As a public servant, absolutely I've got to lead. I've got to be forward in addressing the challenges. And we're doing that. We're doing a comprehensive plan. Now the onus is on me, though, as a public servant, to sell that idea to the public, to help my constituent understand my rationale. At the end of the day, if they disagree with me, I am a public servant. On major issues like this, I don't fear a public vote when it comes to rail. It just makes me work harder to make sure there's a comprehensive conversation about it. The reality is transportation is going to be one of the largest challenges, one of the largest areas of expenditure if we do it right. So we need to have the public on board, and the best way to do that is to have an open conversation and have an open public vote.
And I understand that one of the main routes that any light rail plan would be looked at would be the route that goes from downtown all the way up here to UTSA and right through the heart of District 8.
Yeah.
Do you think UTSA needs that to get perhaps from the main campus to downtown?
Well, it wouldn't be, if we do something like that, in my mind, and again, we haven't even looked at schematics for something like that. We know where the Union Pacific lines are, and we know we have an opportunity with a freight rail bypass to perhaps take some of that right of way and use it for commuter. That's still kind of far out thinking. But I will say that if we do that, it won't be solely for the purpose of moving from one campus to the other. It will be to keep...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Medical center.
Yeah, absolutely. So
way.
that is one of the, we know the Fredericksburg corridor that goes essentially from the medical center downtown. We know that is the most trafficked route via in the entire system. So for me, it never made sense that we weren't talking, when we were talking about streetcar, we weren't talking about those congested routes, because people all over the city viewed the streetcar conversation as a conversation about transportation. Other folks were talking about it as economic development. But when people invest in rail...
That's what said you were on that discussion?
I view it as transportation. And that's why it didn't make sense to me, is because we were putting the light rail route, or I'm sorry, the streetcar routes in areas that weren't congested yet. We were hoping to get people on those routes, but when we're investing that kind of capital into transportation, people want to know it's relieving congestion, that it's allowing for routes to and from work. It's got to make sense as a transportation solution first. If it has economic development potential, great. But if we're gonna talk about it as a solution for transportation issues, it better darn well solve transportation problems. All the other stuff wasn't helping.
Alrighty. And before we close out, I want to bring you back to UTSA. You've said that as UTSA goes, so goes San Antonio.
Yeah.
And I know that you've been a big proponent of UTSA becoming a Tier 1 institution. And I'd like to ask, what does Tier 1 mean to you?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. You know, for me, it means, well, I take my responsibility in that conversation to mean that all the things that we do around the campus, whether it's university overlay zones or it's better streets and sidewalks, we build infrastructure that's conducive to the growth and the collaborative growth of UTSA. For me,
collaborative between UTSA and San Antonio?
Yeah, so like the neighborhoods and the retail districts and commercial districts, that UTA's growth is supported, but also is contributed to by those areas and also contributes to those areas, if that makes sense. And that's what the overlay zone is intended to do. But that's my role, is to make sure that we're doing all the nuts and bolts of the city around the university right. What I view the Tier 1 moniker to mean is that we have, you know, we have premier research facilities. We have the strongest brain power among the faculty and the staff. We have a campus community that attracts students. It makes, you know, when you get a brochure as a prospective UTSA student, you should look at the campus and say, that's where I want to go to school and spend 4 years. Those are the things that I think speak to Tier 1 status. You know, all the other things that we're doing around the campus and, you know, in the city, whether it's the football team or the road signs and things like that, those contribute to that feel. But for me, it's about, you know, the brain power, attracting the best and brightest, both in terms of the students, but also the faculty and staff, and then having the facilities available to meet the demands of those folks. And I got to tell you, in my experience in the last 2 years, UTSA is already on course. We just need to make sure that we continue to support it.
Alrighty. Councilman Ron Nirenberg, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it.
We're good?
We're good.